Good evening and welcome. Everybody, please find a chair at a table. There's plenty.
I'm not sure it's on.
Good evening and welcome. Please, everybody, find a chair at a table. There's plenty up front. I promise we don't bite. Thank you very much for spending your time here with us this evening as we gather your input on the MBTA's community's work. Yes, check. My name is Maureen Toohill. I'm the town planner for the town of Littleton. I've had the pleasure of working for Littleton for close to 27 years and volunteered with the community before that. With me this evening is Emily Innes of Innes Associates. Emily founded Innes Associates in 2020 and brings to us 13 years of planning experience and great experience before that in other areas, including finance committee at one point. We're also joined by town council Ivrea Freed, did I say it right? Okay, from Harrington and Heap. Ivrea has helped us walk through several thorny zoning issues lately, including marijuana bylaws and at Harrington and Heap, the firearms bylaws. So we're prepared to work forward with you on this issue. I'll pause for a minute to allow the Planning Board, Affordable Housing Trust, and/or Select Board to open their meetings, if you have a quorum.
Select Board has a quorum. Officially open.
Yeah, the Planning Board has a quorum. It's open.
I do not believe the trust has a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Emily for a presentation. There'll be time at the very end for questions and answers. For those who cannot attend this evening, the slide deck and a survey will be posted to the website. And thanks again.
Thank you, Maureen. Wow, this is, I think, the best attended meeting I've had for the MBTA process so far. So congratulations, and that's across several different communities that I've been working with. It's fabulous to see you all tonight. I'm really pleased to see so many people on a Wednesday. If you can't hear me as we present, because I know sometimes these mics just do the TV, wave your hand and I will project some more. So I'm going to take you through a presentation, as Maureen said. It's going to go through the modeling, and I'll explain what that means, so the areas on your maps. Then we do have a table exercise, so those of you who are standing now at that point are probably going to want to move to one of the tables, so you can do that. We'll also be asking for some individual input. And then once that's done, as Maureen said, we'll have a report back and then time for general Q&A. So I'm just going to start that presentation now. I hope you all can see this. I'm going to do a very light, this is what the MBTA Communities Act is, just because we've got a lot to do in looking at the districts, but we'll kick off with that. So the MBTA Communities Act is a law that was passed to require that 177 communities that are designated as MBTA communities pass a zoning district that allows multifamily as of right. There's some requirements for those districts. The towns have to have at least one district. That district has to allow for multifamily that does not have age restrictions and allows for units that are suitable for families. It must have a minimum gross density of 15 dwelling units per acre. And in communities with a transit station, such as a rapid transit community or a commuter rail community, at least part of that district must be within a half mile of that transit station. What the MBTA Communities Act is not, it's not a mandate to build housing. In other words, the town has to zone for it, The town does not have to build for it. And in fact, there's not a target number of units that anybody has to build. There's something called unit capacity, which I'll talk about later, but nobody has to build under this zoning. Like any other zoning district, it is an option for the property owner. If it is a base district, it's a standard option. If it's an overlay district, I'll explain that later. It's a different type of option, but it's always a choice. Nobody has to build housing. It's also not restricted just to affordable housing needs. So the law is for multifamily housing. It gives communities the option to put an affordable housing requirement in there, and that affordable housing requirement is limited by what's called the compliance guidelines, but it is not otherwise affordable housing if the town that is passing the zoning chooses not to add the affordable housing. There is no requirement that they do so. It is also not a one-size tool to fit all housing needs. Different communities have different needs for housing. No worries, come on in. And communities that I've been working with throughout this area have been looking at what their housing needs are, where the MBTA Communities Act fits within those housing needs, and uses it to address those. So we'll talk about what that means for Littleton in a minute or two. It's also not viewed as optional by the Commonwealth or by the Attorney General, and you may have seen some news about that. But what we want to do today is delve into some of the options for this town that are compliant options, and we want to get your input and feedback on those options. So just so you know what your requirements are, Littleton is a commuter rail community. That means its deadline for compliance is December 31st of this year. And the town plans to bring zoning to town meeting in the spring, as they did last fall. This will be a different round of zoning, some changes to it. You have to zone for a minimum of 50 acres of land. That is your area target. You have to zone for a minimum number of units, 750 units. That's what's known as your unit capacity. And again, it's not a production target, it's not a requirement target, it is a measurement of size. That is the unit capacity. And you have a minimum density requirement that is the same as all other communities of the 15 dwelling units per acre. You also have a station area requirement, and that is 20% of your land area, 10 acres, 20% of your units, 150 units, must be zoned for within that half mile of your station. And we're going to be talking principally about that today because with the King Street Common area, you've already met most of your compliance requirements. So all we need to talk about at this point is the station area. And those are the options I'm going to show you today. So you can see the King Street Common alone is 40.63 acres. The compliance model, now the compliance model is one of the tools that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities developed for communities to help them calculate their compliance requirements. And at some point, the compliance model, along with the zoning, goes to HLC when a town has approved the zoning. They check the compliance model, they check the zoning, they see that they agree and that the compliance model has shown that they've met those requirements. So when I talk about modeling today, I'm talking about using the compliance model to calculate your unit capacity and your density. The compliance model is two parts. The first part is what's known as geographic information system, basically mapping. The state provided us the information to use in the model for the mapping. There's a couple of different, what they call layers. So some of that is parcel data, some of that is geographic data. That gets fed into the model, and you can actually see on the maps on the tables some of the parcels. That's what we're pulling into the model. The other thing in the model is a series of calculations based on zoning. And so you can use either the town's existing zoning, or you can test zoning and say, if I change the building height, if I change the units per acre, if I change the open space requirements, What does that do to the unit capacity? So the things that you see here tonight are scenarios based on changing one or two of the parameters, and I'll explain what those are as we go through. So just know as we go through, all of the modeling is done through the compliance model. So we're looking for Littleton Station. We know we need 10 acres. When we put different parcels into the model, they're going to give us different results, and it's those results that we're going to explore. And I should say at this point that when we talk about zoning for this effort, we are talking about an overlay district. And an overlay district differs from what's called a base district. Anybody who is a property owner in this room now, your house, commercial building, whatever it is you own, is zoned for something. That is your base zoning. If you have an overlay district, which is what we're talking about here, that overlay district sits on top of the base zoning. So you, as a property owner, can choose to either do something under the base zoning or do something under the overlay zoning. What you absolutely cannot do is mix and match. So you can't say, oh, I like the building height and the base, but I'd rather have the setbacks in the overlay. It does not work like that. You can choose one or the other. But the important word in here is you have a choice. You don't have to do anything. And usually what happens is a property owner will either say, I like my property as it is, that's great, I'm here, I'm fine, no problem, or maybe there's one that has more of an advantage over the other. In that case, maybe I might choose to do something. That's how zoning, very small, short presentation, and the overlay districts work. So this is scenario one. We've got the original King Street Common District that we talked about last fall in there. And this is the map that's on your table that has the colorful parcels on it. Those are the station area parcels that we're talking about tonight. They're within a half mile of the train station. And this is the existing zoning for each of the areas we're talking about tonight. So those parcels that are within that half mile are in your industrial A zone. The King Street Common is in the King Street Common District. And we're going to be talking about a couple of parcels next to the King Street Common that are in the Village Common District. And you can see the dimensional standards that we're using in the model right there. Now, you do have some other dimensional standards in your zoning districts, but the model isn't using those. So we're just using the ones tonight that the model uses. These are the zoning parameters for the station area tests, and I suspect that it's probably a low, I can see some of you can see that screen behind you, but I'm going to read them out anyway. So we're looking at, for all of the parcels except one, we're looking at 1 acre minimum lot size. So that covers our test on 245 Foster, our test on 265 Foster, our test on 295 Foster, and our test on 300 Foster. And then our test for 305 Foster uses a minimum parcel size of 15,000 square feet. Beyond that, we're doing the same. We're doing 50% lot coverage for the building. That means your building can only cover 50% of the lot, no more. We're doing a minimum open space of 30%. So if you add 50 plus 30, you get 80. 100 minus 80 is 20. You have up to 20 that could be for parking or more open space. You have a maximum building height and stories of 2.5 stories and parking spaces per dwelling unit of 2. So we're modeling all of those exactly the same for each of these districts. The difference is we're putting a dwelling units per acre cap on the districts or on each of these parcels. That's different. And what that's saying is that you can't go above, the model looks at parcel by parcel analysis. So it's saying you can't go above this parcel cap. You can only have this many units per acre on that parcel. Now you'll see when you look at the models that sometimes it looks like, well, we've got this cap, why is it a little bit more? That's because of the geography and the math. But just know we've put a cap. So for 245 Foster, for these tests, we've put a cap of 5 units per acre. For 265 Foster, we put a cap of 14 units per acre. 295 Foster, it's 8, and the same for 300, and 305 Foster, it's 415. I would expect the next question that you're going to ask me is, why are those caps different? Why not just use the same one? And the reason being is we're looking to get that 150 units on a minimum of 10 acres. So the density caps are what's driving us to get as low as possible. And the reason they're different is because each parcel has a different number of acres on it. So in order to get down as close as we can, we use those caps I just showed you. So, again, you're going to see, well, some of those are, 176 is not 150. So what we did was say, okay, this looks like we're as close to being above 150 as we can get. What happens if we drop every single one of those unit caps I just mentioned earlier by 1? Are we still compliant? And the answer is no, we're not. We actually go down below the 150 units. So we're trying to work with the minimum possible restrictions to get us as close to being above 150 units as we can. Now, what you're going to see throughout this is that we can be a little creative about the density, which is the number of dwelling units per acre, and I'm going to explain why in a minute. And why comes with expanding the King Street area. So instead of just using 550 King Street, we're adding 410 Great Road and 450 King Street, and we're adding 584 King Street. Now, it's really important. You already have zoning for these. We're not changing the zoning for this at all. All we're doing for today's tests is putting the zoning that exists into the compliance model, seeing what the compliance model brings out, and then using those numbers to average in with the others. So this is how that little piece of the puzzle looks. You've got the acreage, the modeled capacity, which is not going to be the same thing as the built capacity. It is the modeled capacity. Remember, the model doesn't use all of the parameters that your zoning has in it, so it will be different. So what we end up is, for these three groups of parcels put together, we have 46.7 acres. We have 1,052 units, and critically for our analysis, we have 23 dwelling units per acre. What that means is you have to have an average of 15 dwelling units per acre. So what we're trying to do now is, we know we have the 10 acres for our station area because all of those parcels are over 10 acres. We know we can get to 150 units or a little bit above, but can we drop the density on each of those so that we average out a little bit closer to 15? And what does that mean? So that's each of the tests we go for now.
Before you move on.
Yes.
Can we go back to that slide real quick?
Sure.
So 584 King Street, is that where the old Yangtze River is located? So I understand what you're saying, that there's zone and then there's the model.
Yep.
Well, quite frankly, I don't think that anybody in our town would be comfortable with 2 acres having 80 units where the Yangtze River used to be.
You don't have to, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted to stop there because remember, this is your existing zoning. We're just modeling your existing zoning. If somebody came forward with a development on this, they would come forward under your current zoning. We're not changing this. This is just what the model has now. You're not the only person to ask me that question today, which is why I was all sort of ready for the answer, because we've already looked at it. But this, we're not changing
But
anything.
that's deceiving from the standpoint that someday somebody could come forward and ask for that, and that's not what we want.
Right now, we're showing a mathematical exercise of what happens if we model your current zoning and put it with the rest. I understand what you're asking about the numbers, but we were asked to look at these parcels. We put them in the model. That is the number that the model came out with. This is not a development proposal in any way, shape, or form, and it's not a proposal to change that zoning. So it is already what it is. Yes.
So if someone came and said, I want to put 80 units there, can the planning board say, no, we have these requirements.
The other
and-
requirements for the zoning would have to come in, yes. So, all right, with that, the key piece about this expanded King Street for tonight's conversation is that it's staying steady. We've modeled it once. It will always be the common factor in every single one of these scenarios. And so we're looking at that 23 dwelling units per acre. Does that help us or hurt us in the rest of the modeling? So we're going to start with 245 Foster and work our way on each of the parcels that you see there. With that, you're going to see the model results I showed you earlier, combined with expanded King Street. And the thing that you're looking for is that dwelling unit per acre at the bottom. So here, we've got that 176 units we already talked about. We put it with expanded King Street. We're at 15.5 dwelling units per acre. So we meet all the requirements. This is a compliant model. 265, same thing. Now remember, actually, I just want you to notice the difference that you're going to see. So see, 245 is 35.3 acres. So we've got 176 units on it, which works out to 5.2 dwelling units per acre. 265 Foster is smaller. We're still going for the 150, but now we're doing it. We've got 160 with the model on 11.5 acres. That means the dwelling units per acre is going to go up because we've got a more, similar number of units on a smaller number of acres. That's why you see the density, the average density going up.
So I have a quick question. I
Yes.
thought like the minimum buildable lot was 1.5 acres, so how can I get 160 units on 11 acres?
The model is a single acre. We are modeling, that's the parameters I showed earlier. We're modeling all of these under those same parameters, and it is 1 acre.
Okay, so 1 acre is the
1
buildable
acre,
lot.
yep.
Okay.
295 Foster, so we've got 20.2 acres. You can see the dwelling units per acre drop a little bit. So overall, the higher the number of acres, you'll start to see that density drop because we're kind of targeting the same number of units. So again, if it's spread out over more acres, the density drops. If it's spread out over a smaller number of acres, the density increases. 300 Foster, 18.7. And 305, it ticks back up again because 305 is your smallest amount. So that's if you have parcel by parcel, just a single parcel combined with King Street. Then my team was challenged to look at what happens if you put two parcels together. Does that make it any easier? Does that make a difference to the type of development that would happen on those lots? So that's what we're looking for. So right now we're going to drop the density cap to 5 for all of our parcels to see what happens there. So now we're holding everything steady except 305 has that slightly different lot size. So 295 plus 300 Foster, it gets to 204 units. Gets down to 5.48 dwelling units per acre within the station area. Brings it to just over 15 average. So again, we're getting the minimum here. 300 and 305 Foster, same thing, 15.9 this time, about 5.12 dwelling units per acre. You get 153 units. So we are right at that lowest limit we can get in terms of number of units. 295 and 305 Foster, 5.26 dwelling units per acre. 16 dwelling units per acre because 295 and 305, the acreage is dropping as we go through here. So 245 Foster can't go below a cap of 5 units. That's why you don't see it included with anything else. It was already at 5 units. Because it brings, when you do that, because as a single parcel it's so large, it brings the overall density down below 15 dwelling units per acre. We tried a couple of different scenarios. And because the other parcels are now being modeled at 5 dwelling units per acre, if you add 245 into any of them, you just bring that density down even further, you're no longer compliant. So if you wanted to use 245 Foster as your strategy, its advantage overall is it's next to the commuter rail platform, but it would only be able to be used as a single parcel with the expanded Foster Street. 265 Foster, which is on the other side of the commuter rail platform, acts similarly to 305 Foster when you combine it with 295 and 300. It's a difference of 8 units. It's a marginal difference in terms of the density, the dwelling units per acre. And it's because they're very close in size. One's 11 point, 265 Foster is 11 point something, and 305 is 10.7. So the advantage of clustering 305 Foster with either 295 or 300, as I've shown it, is that you get a clustered area of parcels. Some days that could potentially be developed together, maybe. The other advantage is that their proximity to Taylor Street. So if you're thinking about circulation, that could be an advantage. The advantage of using 265 Foster is it's adjacent to the commuter rail platform. I did combine 265 Foster and 305 Foster. It's like the last test, so I didn't do a puzzle piece for it. But I did combine the two of them at a cap of 7 dwelling units per acre. So that would get you your lowest number of acres for a 2-parcel strategy because they're the 2 smallest, and that is compliant. So that would work. You would meet your units number. And here, I did get the puzzle in, that's right. So you can see it here. So if you add 265 Foster and 305 Foster, you get to 6.89 dwelling units per acre, 153 units, and that's with that cap of 7. And then you've got, because they're the smallest ones, they're bumping the density up a little bit. So you can see that quite a bit of this is a mathematical exercise to see what works and how it works. How this gets translated is that if you all today, in looking at the sheets that we have for you to review, if there's a consensus among the group, or several, a couple of different consensuses among the group, that gets put into zoning and it gets taken to a public hearing by the planning board, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in next steps. But what I'm looking for you to do now, we have sheets. We have individual sheets for everybody. What I'm hoping, yes, go ahead.
I actually have a question about the options and the choices. You make it sound like we have to just pick just the bare minimum.
Good question.
And I don't understand why we can't vote yes on 245, 305, 295. We've overshot, Governor. Here you go. We've zoned and we've made more than our minimum. Thank you and good night.
So you bring up a great question, and there's 2 things I want to say on that. Absolutely. I was asked to model the minimums so you can see what the minimums were and how they work. But it's your community and your zoning. If, as you talk with each other at the tables, some of you want to go above that, let us know what you think. Absolutely. I will say that I did model all of the station area parcels together. And what happens is that because you have so much acreage at the level, that the density level I was modeling it, which is that very first one I showed you where the densities were different for each. When I modeled that, all of them together, you had too many acres, and so the average density dropped. So you more than met it from acres, you more than met it from the number of units, but your average density dropped. So by all means, I'm seeing lots of hands, by all means, if you want to add, just know I will have to remodel, and was planning to remodel anything you told us tonight. So the woman in the back, I saw you first, yes?
So I came in a few minutes late, but I wanted to make sure I understood. We could just use parcel 305, which is adjacent to Taylor Street, have all the vehicular traffic exit onto Taylor Street, put a bike and a walking trail over towards the train station, and that would fulfill our requirement, correct?
I will not take on the bike and the walking trail because that might be a little bit different from zoning. But yes, there is a scenario in which 305 by itself does
So
work.
we could just do 305 and have all the vehicle
Yes.
traffic and keep it off of Foster Street.
So what I'm going to suggest, now that I see all these hands coming up, is I just want to tell you what you're going to do next, because that might answer some of the questions. What I'd like you to do is finish filling in the tables here. For people who don't have a table in here, I do have a couple of extra maps. We could start some tables out there. I would like you all to talk with each other about the scenarios as you see them. I will circulate and answer any questions, but I'm also mindful that you all have lives and homes to get to as well. So there's two things that we're going to ask. One is discuss these options, fill out individually what your preference is, but see if your table does or does not have a consensus. I'd be really interested to know. You are going to report that back. The other thing you're going to do is if you flip those sheets over, you're going to see that there are building types on the other side. And we are hoping that, I'm not sure everybody got them, and we are hoping that you also give us your input on the building types as well. So, yes.
So what is the goal of tonight? Is the goal of tonight to kind of tally up, make a vote of what is going to be presented to town meeting?
Not quite, because in addition to what you're doing tonight, Maren mentioned that there's a survey out there. The survey is being launched as soon as we get to that slide on this deck. That is asking the exact same questions. So we are looking from input from all of you tonight, but we're also asking the entire town. And depending on what we hear from you and what we hear from the town is what will go into the zoning for consideration of the public hearing. So.
There aren't enough copies for everybody, so.
Oh, we have more than 70 people? That is awesome. Do you have, are there copy facilities here? Okay, we're going to get some more copies for you. Oh, we've got some extras? Okay, great. Yes.
300 blocks. There we have a section outside the half-mile zone. How does that affect the zone?
Excellent.
Your numbers in.
Yes. So when you put it in the compliance model, that layer of geographic information we got from the state automatically calculates that, so it's taken care of in the model. We know what's in and what's out through the model.
Now, the center point for that circle, is that well defined?
That
Because
center.
sometimes it's a road intersection here, sometimes it's a train station.
That center point is also given to us by the state, and it's marked with, is it marked on here? Yeah, it's marked with the little T on here. So that's given us by the state. All right, yes, sir.
Where the old train station was.
I asked them about it, and they're like, this is what we got. So, yes, sir.
So your model is all math. But nowhere here do I hear any conversation about the water, the conservation, the septic, the animals, and the character of the town, and all of these other things. I mean, I'm on the Conservation Commission, and I gotta tell you, if we're fighting our own town water department not to take out 80 some odd trees without replacing them.
Okay.
We're sure not gonna let you go just destroy a property.
So your question is a good one. We're going to answer general questions about MBTA like that one at the end of this meeting. There will be a Q&A. Please ask that again for that, okay?
I stay because I actually have to go to my conservation.
Can we,
Commission meeting.
we'll remember to ask that for you, okay? Okay. You, sir, and then yes. All right, we'll come back in about 20 minutes. I'll circulate and answer questions. I'll come to you right now. All right, everyone. We're going to get reports back from the tables. And what I want to know is, did your table have, question number one, did your table have a consensus? No. Question number, and that's fine. Just for the record, I am not expecting the tables to have consensus. Just so you know. You're being exposed to this for like these calculations for the first time. The having you all talk about it was so you can have some chance to engage with it. So I'm not expecting consensus, but I would like to know if you did, what it was and why. If you didn't come to consensus, what were the stumbling blocks? And I'm just gonna start here and sort of work my way in a loop around. I will hold up the mic. And then when we're done, we'll have a general Q&A and do our best to answer as many questions as we can. So, table, are you ready? Yes? Okay.
Is it on? Okay. We didn't have 100% consensus, but we did agree that you know, these parcels are not all equal. Some of these parcels are already developed. So it's like, it's a different category, really, you know, redeveloping or developing open space. So I think we were pretty much unanimous on that, to stay away from 245.
Okay, because it's open space.
Yeah, it's undeveloped. Right? It's logical. It just seems to make sense. I mean, from a sustainability perspective.
Okay.
And I don't know how much that comes into play. But yeah, so we were focused down here on through 305, 295, and 300. But 300, it's really a beautiful piece of land, a beautiful hillside with water. So I think we were focused on 295, 305, and with some interest in 265.
All right, thank you very much. And by the way, with just this one report, you're starting to see the difference between mathematics and good community planning, which is why we're doing this and not just talking about something based on its mathematics. So thank you very much. I'm going to take it over to this table here. Pass it down. I love the finger. No, not me, somebody else.
So we didn't have consensus either, although not because we were arguing over it. I think we were just having a big discussion and ran out of time. The only thing I would point out, though, based on what the table over here just said, is the option here isn't developing where the existing buildings are and leaving 245 open space. That's not really going to happen. What's going to happen is either it's zone industrial, something gets built there, and it's either industrial or it's housing. It's not like you're going to leave it open space. So I think that's important to keep in mind here.
You can't say to us what will or won't happen. We're deciding that.
So, but he brings
No, it's
up a
already
very
zoned.
good important point. You remember when I said at the beginning that if you're a property owner, your piece of land is zoned, there is base zoning for all of these parcels. And as you say, for these parcels here, that base zoning is your industrial A. So as you think about this, you know, not just tonight's conversation, you will all be welcome to take the same survey as well. So you get to go away, think about it a little bit and take the survey. Just remember the base zoning. So that's a great point. Yeah. That's good. Then that might be a different one. This table, do you guys have anything to report? Come on. Yeah.
So we didn't reach consensus either, but I can say no one was really interested in 245 Foster or 300 Foster.
Okay.
So we were looking at the combination of the other three properties. We're also curious, is one more favorable with utilities, but seems like they're all kind of equal, other than 245 has nothing at this point, right? So
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I think in general that we just want to see something that's approvable. We're not married to any of these sites.
Okay. Okay. So that's also an important point, is the idea of, you know, how does Littleton want to be compliant? Some of the communities the strategy is completely different community by community, but some communities we just want to get to the minimum, and other communities are like, we are trying in our community to produce housing, we want more to the minimum. So part of this conversation is trying to understand where you are. Yes.
We had consensus.
Ooh.
So we are interested in 295 and 305, and one of our main concerns was the traffic on Foster Street.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. First consensus.
We had two ideas, a lot of subdivision of discussions. So 305 would limit the traffic on Foster Street and has direct access also on Taylor Street. Even though this is for commuter use, a lot of people will not be using the commuter. They'll buy it because it's easy access to 495 and Route 2. And that eliminates a lot of the traffic on Foster Street. The other idea, which is also of interest, so that's the green. The other idea is the blue 265 Foster Street. Both of those limit the number of units. We certainly provide a lot of housing units on King Street. So yeah, we certainly meet the intent, and we provide a lot of multifamily housing in a good location. So yeah, either green or the blue.
Excellent, and two good reasons to be thinking about different options. Thank you very much. Next table.
I guess we sort of have consensus. One of the factors that we were looking at is for the 245 property, there's a development group who is looking to do some really, really interesting things in terms of some of the projects that Park and Rec has wanted with recreation. So we're really interested in that. But it can only use, in senior housing, it can only really use part of the 245. So we were actually thinking go for 295, 265, and 245 to give us more flexibility to then only have to use, say, 10 acres of the 245 and let this really, really interesting developer do some really cool things that we've all wanted.
So you're bringing up another interesting point that I've come across in some communities, which is communities are looking for a certain parcel or certain area to change, and they're using this as an opportunity to say, can we help that change along? So I think, each of you are starting to bring up important points about planning. If you want to pass that on, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, why don't you can go first.
So we didn't exactly reach consensus, but I think some of the ideas that we talked about have been expressed. We like the 295 and 305, partly because the reasons that Katie and Erica's table mentioned. It's close to Taylor, it's not using green space, and then also it's not the density, right? We feel like we're living the spirit of the law with the King Street housing, so we are producing the housing, but without some of the high density in other areas.
Great, thank you very much.
So I was a dissent. I like the, I always, yes. I kind of like the 265 parcel because it's certainly within walking distance of the train station.
Yep.
And I was concerned the other parcels would probably add more traffic to, I used to walk that, and I think up at the top of the hill, it's a little bit further. And the concern was that people would drive, but if there's a shuttle, that may mitigate that. But I just thought the walking was better.
Okay. And that idea of walkability to transit is another important community value to discuss. Thank you. As is, you are doing something at King Street already. What do you want to do in this area? Yes, please, next table.
We actually did come to consensus, and we were in consensus on 300 and 305. And I think that our points were traffic on Foster Street. We liked these because they were leaning towards Taylor Street, with people exiting or more accessible to Taylor Street than driving down Foster Street. We also liked the lower density per acre and the fact that we were kind of just hitting our 150, just over the 150 mark, but certainly the density and the Foster Street traffic were big concerns, which sort of drove our consensus.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
We almost had consensus. Well, I think we almost did. You can correct me. So it sounded like some of us were interested in 265, and then some of us were interested in the combination of 295 and 305 with a swap for 265. And some of us were interested in 295 and 300 again with a swap.
So one thing we thought about 265 was that it could be interesting to have with the higher density, also like some little bit of mixed use maybe could work in there, and shops like a West Concord kind of thing.
Okay.
So apartments above.
Apartments above. All right.
We did have consensus. We liked the 300 and 305 parcels. Again, we're concerned about the traffic on Foster Street, and it has to be said because it needs sidewalks. And we like the fact that with the access to Taylor Street, we also didn't want to take land that wasn't developed yet.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. last table, but then we'll see if there are clumps in the back of people want to talk.
So we had a strong opinion relative to, get the right number here, 305, which is on Taylor Street there. And then a minor dissenting that suggested including the other two parcels, 295 and 300. And the undecided part was, do you go with the minimum number of houses that you need, or do you zone for the future and allow each of them to build at 15 instead of 5 there, so that when it becomes economically viable and the market needs more apartments, we already have zoning that accomplishes that. Did you have any more on this strong, 300 opinion?
We had vehement discussions here.
Good, good.
There are people who believe we should look to the future and worry about our fellow man and be good citizens for the world. And then there's me, who wants to protect everyone on Foster Street, and not just me. There's a group of us who would like to protect the people on Foster Street. Our master plan we said we wanted to concentrate the growth at the Common. The only reason we're doing this is the state is asking us to do this because it's next to a misplaced train station. We have a misplaced train station. The state says we need 150 units by math up there. All of that can be accomplished on 305 with all vehicular traffic going out to Taylor Street. I mean, if you're going to the Point, you can hop on Route 2 and 495 and you're right there. If you're going to taking your kids to school, you go down Taylor Street, you're on King Street, that's easy. It would really reduce the traffic on Foster Street.
Thank you very much. Now,
she's not done.
Oh, she's not done.
This table had a lot of opinions.
Okay.
All right.
My question is that the material you planted here is insufficient. For example, one of the determinants that people in Littleton think a lot about is what's underneath their feet.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the water? Nothing is mentioned in your survey here. So in other words, there could have been a different picture here of what the water table is, how you get rid of sewage. These are all tipping points for people who live in Littleton, not for the developers, except when it comes to the economics of it. People care about what is happening to our water quality, who's contaminating it, why is it, what is going on, and that is something ignored entirely in your modeling. And I think and no matter what assurances you give me, this has been an inadequate, shall we say, exercise. And as the former chairman of the master plan committee, now that's put away, I got to tell you, do more homework.
So I actually wasn't going to give you any assurances or say anything other than you make a very good point. The model does not consider all of those things. We're going to be talking about some of the things that the model doesn't consider in a minute. But this exercise was to get you to think about the things that the model does consider, because that's what has to go into the zoning. There are other things that go into the zoning, and there are other things that aren't in the zoning but still apply. We'll talk about those in a minute. But before we do that, I want to make sure that the people who weren't at the table or at any of the tables get a chance to talk. So that corner back there, were you all part of that table discussion? Awesome. Right here under the portrait, did anybody want a chance to speak? Are you all part of that table? This corner back here, you all good? All good here? Did I miss anybody who wanted to talk? All right. Do you have a comment on the exercise?
Yes.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
I have a comment. I think that we need to go with 2 locations, because that seemed to be the sentiment of here tonight. And I think one of the things that we're blessed with that we're not really taking into consideration here is that we're only talking about 150 units, because 550 is letting the town ride on the coattail of the 600 units over there at 550. It's not like we got to put in 750 units, putting 600 units somewhere else in the town of Littleton. We're not doing that. That's already settled. The 600 is at the 550. So we only dealing with the 150 here. So we should take 2 locations to the town meeting. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the end and then jump back. And the reason I'm going to go into the end is because I think some of you, just looking at the time, some of you may need to leave. So I want to tell you what the next steps are, and then we'll jump back to the Q&A so that people who have questions and want to stay and can stay, terrific, but those who need to leave know what's going to happen next. So critical piece of information, April 4th is the Planning Board public hearing on the draft zoning. We haven't talked about how we're going to incorporate what you've given us today, but my guess is we're going to put a couple of options in for locations and dimensional standards so the planning board can talk about that. But we'll know better after we get the information together. However, the hearing starts at 7:45 p.m. It's over in the town offices in room 103. If you have questions after tonight, I give you Maren. If they're compliance related or otherwise, she'll probably come back to me, but we'll try and get the answers to you. That goes for anything that you might ask during the Q&A that we don't know the answer to. We'll take it down. We'll try and find that answer for you. The planning board.
Questions be posted publicly with like a Q&A so that everybody in town knows what those questions are?
Yeah, our intent was to create FAQs, but I think that's a great idea. We can work if anything comes through. I think that's a terrific idea. Planning Board already has a web page for updates, so the link is there, and this presentation will be on the web page. We have the questionnaire, which is pretty much everything that you had today, and just a couple of extra questions so we can find out who's actually taking it and just get a sense. But we're looking for the things that you requested, and also those 2 questions there about what information you think town meeting members might need, what other information you would need. We've heard a couple of those comments already. Those are also on the questionnaire. We're closing it on March 31st, so my team and I have time to pull it together and be able to give the planning board the information before April 4th. I know it's a tight timeline, but we hope everybody who sees this, please tell your friends, family, strangers on the street to take the questionnaire. We would appreciate the input. So with that all part is done. You are all welcome. We are here to do the Q&A. And this can be, if you still have some questions about the scenarios or the modeling, that's great. But also if you have other questions about MBTA in general, we're happy to answer them as far as we can. Yes, Anna.
So I wanted to mention that this evening, just to show you what the interest is in our town, in that part of town, we do have 2 parcel owners, Mr. Long and or the Cabot folks. And then we also have the gentleman sitting back there who is the property owner of 295 who is also interested. So I just wanted to make sure that folks know who else is in the room and that there is a lot of interest in this project.
Thank you. Anybody have a question? Yes.
I just had a comment because I'm not sure if everybody's aware in the room about the complete streets that have already been approved on Foster. I mean, that was at a recent town meeting, but that's been ready for the last 6-7 years. There are sidewalks going in all the way to the train station up to Balsam. There is a bike path. The street is going to be widened, so that is literally going to happen regardless of what goes on here. So I just want to make sure that I know a few of the people had mentioned that was one of the issues they thought about. There's no sidewalks. Well, that is happening. That's already in the works. The state gave us an $800,000 grant to do that. So.
Okay, great. Oh, we have a question.
It's from Balsam all the way to Taylor Street.
Balsam's right on the other side of the train station.
On the other side, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great, thank you very much for that update. Any other questions? Oh, there's one over there. The mic is on its way.
I just had a question about the housing types that you have on the back, and what they actually mean in relation to the density, because I mean, clearly a 10-unit building would allow you to build more dense than others, but I'm not quite sure how they map and if it's a direct relationship to any sort of density, or if this was more talking about the stylistic architectural aspects.
It's a good question. We were so focused on the parcels, we did not put those up on the screen. So we're also not taking your thoughts here tonight as, permanent. So again, feel free to go onto the survey and give your opinion again. So in terms of the housing units, we were testing quite low densities on some of the parcels. And multifamily is defined in the legislation as 3 dwelling units in a building on a parcel, could be any number of those types, or this gets complex, but it's more than one building with more than one unit in it, which at its smallest level would be 2 duplexes on a site. That's the lowest you can have, either a 3-unit or 2 duplexes. So what these images were designed to do is to give you sort of Massachusetts examples of a little bit more traditional, actually, sorry, one of them's from Connecticut. So New England examples of a little bit more traditional styling at those low densities. I think everybody's familiar with multifamily and the 4 to 6 story range, but because the heights that we tested were 2.5, we wanted to show you the lower ones. Now, what's interesting about that is because some of these parcels or that we tested are more than an acre, you could get several different types of units on there. One of the things to think about before you go and take the questionnaire is if you do something that's 10 units in a building, say you have to get to 20 units on your lot, for example, or you want to do 20 units on your lot, 2 10-unit buildings may take up less land than 5 duplexes, for example. So for those of you who, and I think it's probably most of the room, judging by the conversations, are concerned about preserving open space or conservation, thinking about the footprint of the building on the lot is really important because fewer buildings means that you're tearing up the land a little bit less. So we just wanted to give you some options to think about that were not kind of the classic multifamily that a lot of us have in our brains, just for purposes of just getting a sense of what people like to see. That's the only reason. Yes, sir. Mike, coming back.
Yeah, a comment and a question. For your next meeting, judging by this meeting, 103 is not going to do it. I suggest you move 103 to here, at least. The second thing is, given that concerns have been raised about water, the water, so who's going to put up their hand to get that information and disseminate it? Because unless someone has the action item, it won't happen.
So I did want to make sure that we address the conservation. Thank you for bringing it back. I mentioned that those things that aren't in zoning, and one of those is the Conservation Commission's own jurisdiction. That is not covered in zoning, which means that we're only talking about zoning tonight and a zoning change. The Conservation Commission's jurisdiction remains the same for these properties. Yeah.
Right, but could and I would add that the Aquifer and Water Resource District overlay district remains the same, regardless of this zoning.
Okay, I just then suggest or ask that the Conservation Commission weigh in and say yay or nay what they think about these parcels so that we can get it ahead of time, because it's easier to do that than a town meeting floor.
Yeah. So that, I'm glad you brought that up, and that's on your sheets and also in the questionnaire. Please, any information that you think would be helpful before town meeting, just like that, be really critical for us to know. Board of Health regulations are also not zoning, so Board of Health regulations still apply. So that addresses wastewater treatment, your MS4 stormwater permit, anything like that also still applies. And in fact, the draft that we had last year referred to the MS4. So there are these pieces that are outside zoning. Those don't change. Yes, sir. Wait, Mike, coming your way, just to make sure we get it.
If I remember right, your models are using subtracting any known wetlands.
Yes. Yes. So that's important to note. So he asked about the models subtracting known wetlands. Yes, it was a statement. You are correct. So there are hang on, let me just check. We may have just left excluded land on there. No, we've got two. So the green is excluded land, and the hash marks are sensitive land. You'll see it in the legend on there. Excluded land is land that is assumed to be undevelopable and is excluded from your density calculations. That meant it was a little extra layer of complexity, so we didn't put it into the numbers, but they are in the model. And what that means is excluded land is things like surface water, wetlands, I had the long list, public land, land that is privately owned but for education purposes, and there's probably about 4 or 5 more of them, many of them to do with conservation restrictions. So sensitive land can be built on, according to the model, can be modeled, but it may be something that a community wants to steer clear of. And so, for example, coastal communities, riverine communities, flood-prone lands, anybody who has a stream and a FEMA map around it, that is sensitive land, and many communities have floodplain overlay districts on top of those. You can model it, but some communities have decided to stay away from it. So thank you for that question. All that excluded land is taken out of the calculations. Yes, sir.
Thank you for everything, and I'm glad to see that there was some consensus in the room tonight. I know how important that's going to be for this exercise. I guess what I'm curious about when I leave here, the importance of this and talking with our friends in the community and getting them to show up and vote. What are some of the consequences if we don't get this done and actually find consensus and then make a move in this particular district? Could you explain that a little bit?
I'd be happy to talk about the higher ones unless you want to address that.
I think you'd probably say the same
Okay.
that I would say. Happy to add after.
Okay, I'll say it. You can add anything I forgot. And then Maren, maybe you want to hit the ones that are specific to the town of Littleton. So for all 177 communities and towns, there are 3 grant programs listed in 3A that communities that are not compliant are no longer eligible for. One of them is MassWorks, which is the biggest infrastructure grant program that the state has. In August, HLC put out a list of another 13 grants for which communities that are non-compliant are deemed to be less competitive. They're at a disadvantage. Those grants are already competitive grants, so it really puts everybody at a lower level. In March of last year, the Attorney General had put out a letter to all 177 communities and towns saying that she and her office said that compliance was required. Anybody who's following the news about the town of Milton has noticed that she is serious about that compliance. Anything I forgot?
I think that's covers it. There are now 4 grants. One was added in March, so
that's right.
there's 4 different types of grants now. But yeah, the high level picture is less competitive for numerous grants, ineligible for other grants, and potential to be sued by the Attorney General.
Yeah. And then Maren, I don't know if you have any specific grants or.
For Littleton, I've called it the $20 million question because adding up the grants we've gotten in the recent past and the ones we could look forward to over the next couple years, we rely quite a bit on grants especially for the infrastructure, the town sewer and water extensions that we've been doing lately.
Your hand first and then your hand, yeah.
I just want to ask Gary, can you talk about the efforts that the various town boards have made to move the state powers that be into a direction where we wouldn't be in this position? I mean, talk about the letter,
Yeah, we've tried several different things over the last several months by writing letters, referencing how we can potentially get out of this by utilizing more of 550 King Street and increase density, really trying to show I had signed a letter to the governor referencing that the Lapoli properties are putting in the bus station. They are fully backing it. It's going to be a shuttle that runs to the train station. Can this help alleviate this? And the bottom line is with this, the letters that we got back was, you have to zone for it. They're not going to give any community, because then it'll open up the floodgates to variances and all these things. So we have to make sure that we're zoning within the half mile, the 150 units, whether they're ever built. That's a discussion, I've had, with different members in the room. In my opinion, it doesn't matter if they are ever built. Now that may mean to you, well, we want them built, we want more housing, or it may mean, well, let's put it somewhere that'll never be built for the next 30 years. I do know that side of the street, the Foster Street area, unfortunate where our train station is, we all can agree to that, but things are going to happen there. We have a developer in the room and owners of property, so something's going to happen. So I did hear a couple of things saying, well, it's open space. It's not going to remain open space. Something is going in there. Now, I would love to have the town have more control over that, not MBTA driving it down our throats. But I think we all need to start thinking, what do we want in some of these locations? Because things are going to change. So I'll use 245 as the example, because we know that that's someone that before MBTA was already trying to do something there, work with the town. So just be wary of that I know a lot of this effort looked like it was going up Foster Street. Makes a lot of sense to some regard with traffic and things, but something's going to happen at 245, and whether it's building zoning for industrial or different type of industrial buildings or whatever goes in there, we should really start thinking about what we want as a community in there for homes, for apartments, and working with a developer that potentially could put other things there. I know, so there's more to come on that, but just kind of think a little bit bigger. But I'll just let you know that the select board and planning board have sent, I think, 3 rounds of letters to the governor trying just to get creative, to try to give us some variance here, because we are a unique community. As we come up MBT, every town center seems to be built around a train station. Littleton, not so much, and it's just, it doesn't help anybody by moving an apartment complex. And I've said it in my letter. And down at MBTA, down on Foster Street, a big apartment complex, children and things like that. There's nothing there. But they won't budge on it. So this is what we're left with. And I'm excited that there's this many people in the room right now. And I know town meeting, it's going to be a hot topics coming up. But I think a little bit bigger and broader than just MBTA communities, what we have to do, and then think about what we want as residents to see down there for what's best for Littleton, to potentially curb some of the, I'm not going to call it relentless buildup that we're being pressured to do, but is going to happen in town. So we're very cognizant of it, but more discussion to be had, and we just got to keep our minds open and be creative on what we want to see Littleton look like in that area. So that's really it. But
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had you here, and then I have somebody in the back as well.
I just wonder,
You can borrow mine.
Gary, is the $13 million sewer money at risk if town meeting does not pass a bylaw that satisfies MBTA?
To be honest with you, it's a race, right? That money's not in our pockets right now. So it's a scary situation that potentially could be held up. It's a legal question on whether, okay, we've already kind of got the commitment from the state on this, but I don't know until it's transferred into Littleton's coffers. I'm concerned about it for certain.
And also, does that go for the sidewalk fund for Foster Street? I'm worried about that.
Correct.
And maybe it's a legal question, or you, if we pass an MBTA Communities Overlay District that isn't capable of being built for one reason or another. I personally think 265 Foster is mostly wetlands. Is that likely, is the state likely going to say, you passed this trying not to get something built. I'm worried about that too.
I'm going to add a little bit on the flip side of that. So at the MMA conference in Boston, Chuck, myself, and a couple other members spoke to one of the housing sectors.
Chris Kletchman.
Thank you. Chris Kletchman, who's very in tune, watches all the town meetings up and down the MBTA community, really wants to see what people are thinking and what our meetings are what's coming out of there. They're very excited about Littleton and what we're doing outside of this half-mile radius. And they will never put anything in writing that says you have to, we don't care what you do down on Foster Street. You guys are a requirement in the center of town. But I, for one, it's kind of like a wink's as good as a nod, if you will. If I'm reading that room correctly, it was more of just zone something down there, please. Zone something, because we can't continue to say Littleton's doing a great job if you're not following in compliance with everybody else. So they recognize the great things we're doing, and they're very excited about the project at the Common. And that's why I kind of go back to just think what's best for Littleton, knowing that we have to do something down there on Foster, whether it's MBTA communities or at a future town meeting when we're talking, potentially about more development down there, what we want that to look like, and work with the developers.
I have this gentleman, and then I have you.
Hi, everyone. My family owns 245 Foster, and just to back that up, I just wanted to let people in this room know, before Cabot and Forbes came on with us, we were in conversations with a cold storage warehouse developer after the fall town meeting, because that seemed to be the direction that we were going to have to go. We're looking at multiple buildings on there, cold storage. It's what people approached us with years ago, and when the vote went against us in the fall, that's the direction we're looking to head. If you listen to some of the stuff they're offering, it sold us on giving it one last shot. So I just wanted to mention that thinking beyond just what has to happen right now, what would be better on 245 Foster in the long run, that it won't stay like it is, so that's why we're here right now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as citizens here tonight, we have 2 shots to do this in the spring of May and November. December is the deadline. So if we don't do it in May, we got to do it in November. Listen, do not try to fight the state. They have length resources, and the Attorney General has already stated it's a law, and I'm going to enforce it, and I'm going to see you in court. Let's don't go down that road. We're too smart for that. Let's do what we need to do in May and get this stuff behind us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I don't think anybody's saying that we shouldn't do something, but the people in this room seem to think that 245 was not the choice. And I don't think we should be a lot of people thought that, and I don't think we should be blackmailed into choosing that.
All right, so just remember that we're going to be looking at all of your sheets because you're leaving them here so we can read them all. And we're going to be looking at the online survey, so don't forget that. Any other questions? All right, yes.
No.
I have a question here.
I just
Yes.
want one last thing. I want to say.
One more question, everybody, right here. Yep. The mic's above.
Oh, yeah. I just want to say 245 is not permanently protected. There's no guarantees. However, I really feel like we have a lot of sprawl. Our development, just like it's single family homes on big lots. You see that, big thing down on Durkee? It's sprawl. And I think we have an opportunity to move away from that. And the smaller parcels would
would help us do that.
Anyone else? In that case, thank you all very much for coming out and for your opinions. We really appreciate it. And just leave your papers on the table. We'll collect them.